Alrighty, welcome everybody. Happy Tuesday. This is our second time running the How to Defer Your College Admission the Right Way. I am joined today by Sarah and Julia, who Sarah actually worked with us in our last webinar. Julia, this is her first one. My name is Charlie Tavey. I am the CEO of Year On. We run structured gap year programs for high school grads to help them figure out more about themselves and what they want to do. We're a three-phase program. Students volunteer abroad, then they learn some life skills in San Francisco, and then based on what they're learning about themselves in our first two phases, they're going off into internships, they're getting jobs, they are building their portfolio. And the really cool thing about us is that they're working with a coach, one-on-one and in a group for the entire time that they're with us. Today's supposed to be super interactive, so if you have questions, please feel free. You'll see at the top there's a chat box, there's a Q&A box. We have our outreach director, Cody Hartley, who's behind the scenes today. He's going to make sure that we kind of stay on track and we get all of your questions answered. But feel free during it. We'll kind of stop. We'll call the question out so everybody can listen to what the answer is. I want to start off and invite Sarah and Julia to introduce themselves, and then we can kick everything off. So, Sarah, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. As Charlie said, my name is Sarah Smith, and I am the director of the Global Gap Year Fellowship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I've been in the position about 3 years. Our program, however, started in 2011, and we have been supporting 7 students who've been accepted to UNC Chapel Hill to defer enrollment for 1 year and take a service-based gap year abroad. And we're actually very excited this year. We're going to be supporting 14 students to do that. And I am just happy to be here and happy to answer any questions. I will say I kind of forgot this part last week, but something kind of unique about our fellowship is that we do offer full funding for our students to make it more accessible. Traditionally, we've been trying to support students who are underrepresented, particularly in global experiences. So students who may be first generation, students from rural backgrounds, students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and students of color. So that's just a little bit about our program. Happy to answer any questions about our program, but specifically about deferring today.
Thank you. Julia?
Hi, everybody. I'm Julia Rogers. I'm the founder and lead consultant for En Route Consulting, which is a boutique agency that works individually with gap year students and their families to formulate customized gap year plans. So I work with students all over the country. I work with about 50 a year and help them really isolate their goals for their gap time and then match them with the appropriate activities and programming to help them really make the most of their gap time. And I would say that of the clientele that I work with, a lot of them are doing multiple things over the course of their gap year, either a multi-pronged program like Year On that has different components, or different programs in different places to kind of stockpile a variety of different skill sets and experiences. So yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. You know, I think that we're in the season right now, and we were just talking about how it's, March is the month where students find out whether or not they've been accepted to their college, whether they've been waitlisted. As Julie was telling us about, they might also, there's now this new mechanism where it's an automatic deferral, where you've been accepted, but you are automatically deferred for a year. And this has really just come on the radar, I think, over the past couple of years when Malia Obama decided to take a gap year. I think she put the gap year space really on the map and had a lot of families starting to ask, what is this, and should this be something that we're considering? A lot of people know gap years as a time. People in Europe that do them, in Australia that do them, almost, it's like almost 15 to 20% of all students are taking this time. But in the United States, we're not quite there yet. There's about 1% of students that are taking it. But we're starting to get a lot of momentum here. And as Sarah mentioned, the Global Gap Year Fellowship, it's trying to double in size in what they're trying to do. And there's a lot of gap year programs that are also trying to push this space. But a lot of colleges are now starting to look at this and to say, what could the process look like here if we had students who were taking a gap year before they come to our college? What would the benefits be, and how could they be better prepared? And there's been some articles that just over the past few months that have come out. One of them was in the Wall Street Journal at the end of last year. Welcome to college, now take a year off. It spoke about, similar to UNC, Duke has a fellowship that they're starting this year. We're one of their partners to encourage students who have been accepted to take a year to learn more about themselves and what they want to do. And universities are also starting to really invest in this. UNC was one of the pioneers here. There are other schools that are saying, how can we make a freshman year, first semester experience really valuable for students and get it so they are able to walk into college prepared, they know more about themselves, and then they can graduate, you know, in the 4 years or the 6 years that the curriculum is designed for them to graduate in. And I think that, you know, with all of this, we really start to think about, okay, well, before we even get to this point, and you know that there's a whole, last month was Gap Year Exploration Month. We went through what gap years really are and how they can be beneficial for a student. And if you want to learn more about that, please feel free to visit our website. We have that webinar that you can view. But today we really want to talk about, well, before we even get to the gap year, students have to defer their college admissions. And I think that before we even get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of what it means to defer your admission, we need to take a step back and really understand what kind of students are deciding to defer. There's a huge population of students that we have here in the United States, and they're all very, very different. But Julia actually put together a really awesome graphic here for us to show the types of students. And Julia, could you kick us off? And then Sarah, I would love for you to talk from your perspective. You know, you're in application season right now for the Global Gap Year Fellowship, what kind of students you're seeing. Julia, you work with dozens of students a year. You've been doing this for a long time. What kind of students are even thinking about deferring now that they are starting to receive their college acceptance letters?
Sure. Well, I think that as people become more sophisticated in understanding the gap year, they realize that a gap year is not just for one kind of student. And typically, I think that people tend to associate gap time with whoever they know who's taken a gap year. So if you know a student who was a really high achiever and was burnt out, and that's the reason they took a gap year, you might think that that's what a gap year is for. Or if you know a student who didn't know exactly if they were going to college or doing something else after high school and took a gap year and ended up kind of doing a variety of different things as they figured it out, you might think that like that's the kind of student. And really what the neat thing about gap time is that it's not just for one type of learner. There are so many different types of student profile that can really benefit from gap time. And that is because the space services different types of learners with different activities and opportunities for growth and engagement depending on their needs. So really, you know, one of the things that we are seeing are these students, the worker, you know, these students who are high achievers, high academic performers, high test scores, high GPAs, applying for elite schools, and they tend to be pushing themselves to the brink, sometimes to their own, you know, emotional and mental health detriment. And so these are students who are really well qualified for gap time to simply take a breath, to reprioritize their self-care, and to maybe get some more perspective on actually what they enjoy doing, what they want to study in college, and that kind of thing. Whereas there's another type of student that's kind of related to that, the meaning seeker. These are students who are very bright, but they, you know, don't tend to do well in the classroom environment. They're tinkerers, they like doing things experientially, and they may not have been well served in the traditional like classroom environment in high school. So these students, they're typically college bound, they want to go to school, but they're, you know, not super excited about it because they have this idea from high school about what it means to be in a classroom. So these students will typically do things on their gap time that have to do with figuring out what they want to do as far as a career or a vocation, and then understanding that the path to that career is a college education. And then once they understand that and have that perspective, they're able to engage more effectively with their college education. We also have, again, similarly, the pragmatist, a student who may fit one or more of these other roles, but they just simply want to get the most out of their college education by understanding more about their strengths, what they want to study, and they do things on their year that help give them clues as to what they're good at and also a career path or at least a college major path that might suit them. So that could be interning, could be meaningful volunteer work and other types of activities that can give them that kind of knowledge. We also definitely see students who you know, have learning differences or other mental health issues that have prevented them from fully embracing the college environment, whether they're going to be college bound or not. So these students can be well served by you know, hybrid programs that are gap year with a therapeutic focus, gap year with a focus on helping students with learning differences get the skills they need to succeed in college. So there are these specialized programs that can really assist students who fall into that category. And then we also have students that we kind of refer to as the floaters. These are students who we just all know when we talk to them that they are not ready for college. These are the students who may not show up for class, may not take it seriously, may waste their parents' money, may party too much their freshman year. And these students really, they kind of like meaning seekers. They need to get some perspective about what is so valuable about college and understanding why they're there and really have some purpose to that next step. So Sarah, anything to add on those?
I think Julia did a great job of covering the bases. I will say, with a program embedded in a university, we tend to have an emphasis more on like the worker type. So these students are high achievers. They've done really well in school. They have, quote unquote, checked all the boxes to get, into the university that they want to. But in a lot of ways, they may be undecided about what they want to do with their career. They may be a little bit burned out. And really benefit from some time away from the classroom, and that's really the type of student we see a lot of that. We also see a lot of students who would maybe fall in the pragmatist category. So they're excited about going to college or university, but they may they feel like they're being pulled in multiple directions, or they aren't really, really positive what it is they want to do with their career and with their time in university. So having the opportunity, and again, with our program, it is service-based, to volunteer in another community and really build those skills, but also to develop a clearer focus of what they want to do. So I would highlight those, not to say we don't see students from all categories, but in particular, we do see kind of more of the worker type and the pragmatist.
That's great. And, from a program side, we serve a whole bunch of different students. I would say we probably have all 5 of these in our groups. And what's really interesting is how they interact with one another. Just at the end of the day, a lot of them saying, I just need a little bit more support. So they are raising their hand and they know that, hey, listen, this is a time that I want to take for myself. I want to talk a little bit here before we again get into these nuts and bolts about how we can support students who are considering deferring. I think that now that we know the types of students that want to do this, we obviously have questions from parents, we have questions from counselors, and also from the university perspective. Julia, can you start off, how do we even start to have this conversation with people? How do we support them as they want to make this decision? We've gotten questions before that says, from counselors who say, like you said, oh man, that person that we just all know could use a little extra time before they go into school, but they're really convinced that they should just go into school. Like, no, I want to go. How do we start to have this conversation with both stakeholders in this process, which is not only the student, but the family?
Definitely. Well, I think that one of the things to really be cognizant of as you're talking about a gap year is to make sure to frame it always as a positive, empowering choice. There still is a bit of a myth around, again, that who takes a gap year. And students tend to think because they have been, I think, they have been indoctrinated, sounds negative, but they have been brought up to believe that college is the path to success. You have to get there, you have to get into the best school, and you have to go there straight away, or else, I don't know, that you fall into this nebulous vacuum and never succeed in life or something. So I think that we're still working against this stigma that some students even have against this path, even if they feel drawn to it. And that's not I wouldn't say across the board, but that's something that I definitely see on the student side, is even if their parent knows that it's a good choice or their counselor knows it's a good choice, they still feel this pull to going straight into college. And I think that one of the ways that we can help destigmatize the gap year is by making sure that it's presented as almost a gift rather than like a stick, rather than we don't think you're ready for college. It has to be, we really think that this would be an amazing thing to help you build on what's going to be a successful college experience. So no matter what kind of profile the student fits into, presenting it in a really positive way is a good tact. And then also, I think making sure that depending on how long you work with a student, presenting it alongside other options as early as possible, because usually a student needs time to warm up to this idea. We do see a lot of students this time of year that are kind of, they just decide right off the bat when they, get an automatic deferral, or when they kind of come to their realization that that's not the right choice to go straight to college. But if you can plant that seed early, it will blossom on its own, and that helps them plan ahead a little bit longer.
Agreed. And Sarah, I think that on that, so we actually have a question here from Alex Ellison, who's a former panelist. She helped us with Gap Year Exploration Month. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us. And Sarah, she's asking, for students who don't get into your Gap Year program, do they typically start at UNC in the fall, or do they do another Gap Year program? And I think that with that question, if you could talk about, we've spoken a lot about how, your office in particular helps support students who are considering this time. So maybe, a 2-for-1 there, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, students, unfortunately, we can't support every student who applies, although we wish we could. So one thing that we do in our process is that we try to give students as much information about gap years as possible. So if for whatever reason they don't progress in our process, we send them kind of a list of resources. Often they're programs that I may know, so Year On is on our list. So we inform them that these are great programs that we feel confident could be valuable to you, and especially for our students who do have financial need, these programs in some way offer financial need or financial need-based scholarships. I'd say in a given year, this is just kind of off the top of my head, say this year we had about 80 students apply, we're able to support 14. I may hear of 2 or 3 who pursue a gap year independently of us. I wish I could say it was higher, but it tends to be, a pretty low number. But there are a few who do pursue a gap year elsewhere, who are just so determined to do it. And that's wonderful. We also encourage them, we offer ourselves as resources. So even if they aren't in our program, there have been multiple times where I've met with parents or students just to talk about gap years in general. So we do try to be open-minded and supporting students, even if they aren't in our program, so to speak. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. I will say that we have, because we've seen a need where students maybe aren't exactly ready between high school and college, that we've started a bridge year program where we support students to take a year between their sophomore and junior year, or their second and third year at UNC. Unfortunately, we're only able to support 2 at this time. But that program has gotten a lot of traction. And in fact, some students who maybe weren't selected for our GAP program, we're seeing them apply for our bridge program. And so that's been a kind of an interesting process as well. And then Charlie, remind me of the second half of that question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I think that you answered it. Do they start at UNC, or do they start another gap year program? And then I would love, if you could just dive a little bit more. I find the UNC model to just be really interesting, and it's definitely a little different. But talk to us a little bit about the Global Gap Year Fellowship, and what are students doing?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So up until this point, our program has been completely self-designed. So what that means is our students work with staff. We lean heavily on resources at the university. So some of our professors, language area experts, and then also students who have done gap years or who have traveled previously. And they, basically get to decide where they go. Obviously with a limited budget, we have to be very conscious of what's feasible, making sure that the money lasts. They're awarded $8,000 to do our program. And so, a lot of this is coaching on my end around financial management and budgeting to make that last for the year. Because we do tell our students that they can supplement, but they're not by no means required to do that to make their gap year happen. And so our students actually come to UNC over the summer before they take their gap year, and we do a 2-week summer institute where we do a deep dive into what is a gap year, what is ethical service, how do we really embed ourselves in the community, how do we make sure that we're aware of our power and our privilege going into these communities, and how do we hope to ultimately tie that into our time at Carolina. And so we really value those 2 weeks with those students, help them create their gap year, and then they usually leave around August or September. We've had students go all over the place. Our big restriction is whatever the State Department says is not safe for our students, and I think that's probably across the board. So aside from that, students are welcome to go almost anywhere. And they do have to do at least 6 months of service abroad. So, I'll just give you a few examples right now. We've got, one young man who is in Greece right now, working with recently resettled, migrant populations, refugees. We have a couple of people. We actually have one student who is participating in Amigos, which is a third-party provider program in Latin America. She's in Ecuador. So we really, we have students all over the place doing really creative projects. We've had them work on things like conservation. So, we had a couple of students go to Madagascar and work on conservation efforts. We've had students teaching English, in a variety of school settings, doing after-school programming. Students teaching music has been really interesting and really powerful for our students. It really kind of runs the gamut as far as what our students do. I will say that our program does not offer academic credit, which is something that's kind of interesting and emerging more and more in the GAP field. We find that our students, and again, because a lot of our students are the worker type of student, that it's nice for them to have a break from their academics and to really immerse themselves outside of the classroom. Obviously, that's unique to our program, and every program is different, but that is something that we find is important. Something else that is important is that we create a community for our students, and I think that's something that most programs strive to do. That community is really powerful, even though our students typically travel independently, because they've gotten to know each other so well over those 2 weeks over the summer. They are very, they're in touch over Skype, WhatsApp. Some of them even travel together. And we find that that's really powerful as well. And it helps them feel like they've got a landing pad when they come back to college. They already have friends who have a shared experience with them. So that's a really important piece, I think, of our program, but also of a lot of programs. So I know we're getting a little bit away from the deferral conversation, but when considering programs, I would definitely emphasize looking for a community for your student. That can make a big difference.
And I would also say, first to Julia's point about, if you are able to frame this as if it is a gift and not use it as you must because you're not ready for something. I mean, just the amount of experiences that you were able to talk about in the last 2 minutes. I mean, from Madagascar all the way to doing a service immersion program in Ecuador, there are really awesome opportunities for students abroad. And I think that, to your point about community, Sarah, and sorry that I'm making you talk a lot right now, but, why are universities getting on board with this? Why are they saying, yes, we should be using our brand equity and telling students that if this is what they need, we want to meet them where they're at and make sure that they can have these experiences, that they can take this time. Why is that? You spoke a little bit about the community piece. I think that that's important, but what else is in it? Why are universities saying sure, I'm going to defer your admission for a year. Hopefully you come back.
So there's a wide variety of reasons. And I will say that I'm very lucky to work at a university that does value experiential education. So I think what has happened in the conversation over the past 6-7 years has kind of changed. But what we've been able to prove is that, one, retention. Students who take a gap year are significantly, I don't have the exact number, but have a higher likelihood of finishing university, some in as short as 3 years, depending on if they are able to get college credit during their time, or maybe what they're coming in with. So our retention numbers are really good. Two, they feel, at least at UNC, the conversation with the admissions office is that they feel that these students add a lot to their class. They've had these experiences. They've been out to these different parts of the world. They've, developed these intercultural competencies that really add to the Carolina community. They add to their language courses, to their cultural courses, to their history lessons. They're able to incorporate these experiences. Yeah. So that's a value add for them. Also, our university, and a lot of universities, have a commitment to, ours is service, but also to supporting students, who may not have an opportunity to go abroad elsewhere. So we have something called the Global Guarantee. And so programs like this help us get those students abroad and help them to have meaningful experiences. So universities are more and more becoming aware of the need for programs like this. So those are some of the reasons. There are definitely more, but I would say definitely, retention rates. Universities are very interested in keeping those rates up. The value add to the classroom and to the community, and also just being able to support more students to have these global experiences.
For sure. And, Julia, you working with students, I think that we can kind of start to talk a little bit about what students are going to be doing before they go. But when you start working with students now, we're in the season again, they've gotten their letter, and it says, you've been accepted, congratulations. And maybe, you're not involved, you're not getting accepted to a college like UNC that has this amazing program, and you're going to go off and you're going to start to think about what it is you want to do for your year. How do we start to have students defer what we say, is the right way? Not the only way, but how do we start to encourage students to approach this?
Sure. Well, if they've been forward thinking about their gap time, they may have already kind of looked and culled their original college list to programs or universities and colleges that they know are deferral friendly, meaning they have, deferral policies in place that make it relatively easy to defer admission. And if they're in a position where they're just kind of coming to the idea of taking a gap year, that may not be the case. So I guess first things first, you kind of give yourself a pat on the back for getting into college. and then you kind of take ownership over the fact that now that you are chosen, it is your now gift to choose what you do. And that's a really cool kind of pivot. They've spent the past 6 months asking to be chosen, and now they get to choose what happens next. So it is, no matter whether they're taking a gap year or not, it is a really empowering moment in time for them these next couple months as they're choosing where it's the best fit for them. But they do want to call now that the ball is in their court, they're accepted, there's no fear of like having to call the admissions office under a pseudonym or something like that. They can call, they can say, what's your deferral policy? And that's the first step, is really calling admissions, asking what their deferral policy is. And typically, that most deferral-friendly colleges will ask for a deposit and a letter of deferral. And the letter will include their ideas about why they're taking a gap year first and foremost, and what they plan on doing to make it a productive year out. So the student should be not only deciding that they want to take a gap year, but really thinking critically about what they're doing and what components, whether formal activities or other kinds of experiential activities, are going to be the components and building blocks of their gap year.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And Sarah, last week you spoke a little bit about, there's a lot of pressure, obviously, once you've been admitted, to, like Julie's saying, you don't have to, under a pseudonym, say, hi, I have this random person that wants to take a gap year. You've been able to get through the door. They say, sure, like you can defer, you send everything in. But there's a huge piece of this that then is kind of forgotten about, and it's the entire back end once you have, quote, deferred. Talk to us a little bit about that, because from the university perspective, this is where things, I feel like why schools sometimes say, no, you cannot defer, is actually because they're losing students on the back end because they're not following through with a lot of the different aspects that they need to in order to be able to smoothly integrate themselves into either their incoming class or as a transfer student when they get back on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that's really important is not only, sending in the letter, getting the approval, all of that, is staying in touch and making sure that you are fully aware of what's required of you during that year away. And every university is different. So from my perspective at UNC Chapel Hill, particularly if you are need-based, you're applying for financial aid, you've got to resubmit your FAFSA. That's really important. And sometimes students are quick to overlook that. And I believe you can start it as early as November, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe even October. So I would say go ahead and get that done ASAP, just to make sure your financial aid is being processed and that you're being offered the best package that you can get. Aside from that, most universities have a checklist. So there'll be things like signing up for your orientation, signing up for housing, all these other things that are really important that you don't want to forget about just because you happen to be in a different continent. So definitely try to stay on top of those things. And, if for some reason you're unable to find them, definitely just communicate with your admissions, team. So if you have a counselor assigned to you, just stay in contact with that person and ask, what am I missing? And what do I need to make sure I do? And what's the timeline for that? Because it's really important. And then also, we want you to be as ethical as possible. If you have committed to this university, you should go back to that university. Obviously things happen, but it's really important that, if they're willing to give you this year away, or really this year on, that you do go back to that university. Our students are required to, they have to go to Carolina for at least 1 year. or they're required to pay back their fellowship. But, you know, it is important to just to do this ethically. And if you say that you are committing to the school, that you are doing that.
Agreed. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit. I think that there's this, now we're kind of getting into what universities look for in the deferral request letter. And I'll have Sarah and Julia talk about that from their experience. For us, we'll send this resource out in the follow-up comms to all of you. We created a quick tool for students, or, you know, we've had actually a lot of counselors write in to help their students, but resources.yearon.com/deferral. We will automatically populate a deferral letter. You tell us the university that you're looking for, and we'll do all of the groundwork of finding the admissions dean and their email and who you're going to send that into, to make it as simple as possible. I think that a big part of this is the process is very opaque right now. Students aren't sure how they would even go about this, and the idea of, after going through, you know, what really feels like battle of getting all of their stuff in for the Common App and all of their documents together to be able to submit to college, everything from letters of recommendation to transcripts, the idea of having to do another step to do something, I think, can be very taxing. And obviously, you know, we have a lot of counselors that are on this call. We've had a lot of parents as well. And if you're not working with a counselor and you are looking for this support, this is a good template that you can start to use. So I'm going to just walk through this really quickly, and then Sarah and Julia, you can obviously talk to what, you know, you all have used for what you've seen in your deferral letters. So for us, you know, when we created this, we've done this now, we've run over 250 students. We've seen a lot of people go through this and ask us about their deferral letter. A big thing is obviously finding that right point person. You can do that just by calling up every once in a while when I can't find them online. I just give the university admissions office a call. Sometimes it's not the dean, sometimes it's the operations person that's dealing with all of the back-end logistics that need to happen to be able to allow you to transfer. But getting that right point of contact, and then making sure that you're clearly stating who you are. If you have, you know, your applicant number, your student ID number is really important to do that. And the clear statement of intent, like Sarah said, you know, I want to go to this university, and I do think that is my best choice. At the same time, I would like to take this time to make sure that I'm better prepared. And then a real detailed explanation about what you're going to do. You know, the reason why we call it year on is because a gap year with us is not a year off. We think that all students, if you're taking a gap year, it should be productive time for you. It should be a time that you're really thinking about who you are and what you want to do. And there's a reason why, if you do this the right way, it is contributing in the way that was mentioned earlier, that there, you know, you do have higher retention rates. You are going to graduate hopefully in 4 years. We've seen these longitudinal studies done that prove this. So kind of what are you going to do? And then what those next steps are. You know, I'm still going to deposit, and I'm still happy to join, you know, the class of, right now we're in 2023. So this is how we structure it. It doesn't mean, you know, it's not one size fits all, but, you know, Julia, talk to us, the students that you've worked with. Is there anything that you would add in here? Is there, you know, any other ways that you would think about structuring a letter like this?
Yeah, I love that you have kind of the anatomy pulled apart, because I think that I think that the statement of intent is really important, that you're excited to go to that particular school, but first you want to do X, Y, and Z. I think that the only thing I would add to this is that from what I've gathered from speaking with admissions people, they understand that if things change throughout the year, this is not a binding letter. So, I mean, obviously year on is a special case because that's a year-long program. Probably things won't change while they're on it. But if a student is doing 3 or 4 different things, their plans often evolve as they learn more about themselves, as they make money or spend too much money, or whatever the case may be. So I think that it's important for you to know, for your students' sake, that that, you know, counselors in the admissions offices don't consider these binding statements of intent. It's just supposed to give them a clear sense that it's going to be a purposeful year, and, you know, that kind of thing. So.
For sure. Sarah, I know that you work closely with the admissions office, so it's a little bit different, but anything to add on that?
No, I actually think this is a wonderful example. We are fortunate because we do work with our admissions team so closely, that we're really, you know, the students just kind of send them a message and say, this is who I am. This is my identification number, and I'm part of this program. But for anyone else in communication with their admissions office, the more information you can provide, and being clear about your intent to come back the following year, I think is really important. Yeah, so I think this is a great example and a great resource.
Cool. So we have a few minutes left here. I think that there are some important questions that we started to touch on, but Julia, bring us through a little bit. Money is a big consideration here. UNC, they have the fellowship that they're supporting students. Again, other schools are trying to work with credit. We're trying to work with schools to help them with their financial aid to allow this to be accessible. For the students who are saying, hey, this is something that I want to do and I know that I need to do it before I walk into university, what do they really need to keep top of mind as they're walking into their gap year in terms of their merit-based scholarships and their need-based grants and scholarships?
Right. So I would just say, like, briefly, that also when we're thinking about the larger financial picture of gap time plus college, we should also be thinking about the return on investment of the college experience post-gap time. So when we're thinking about the college experience plus a gap year as a 5-year kind of package deal, it's also good to keep in mind that, like, students who do this time and invest in their own gap year, both in the time-wise and any financial ways, they're going to be probably getting that benefit back in a higher quality educational experience for themselves later on. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of the college process, they do most merit-based scholarships. Well, actually, let me back up. A lot of this is case by case, and a lot of the stuff you're going to hear in the next couple slides is very much case by case. So it's always, people have to do their own checks. Either you or the student or the family have to double check and triple check some of this stuff, because there is no rhyme or reason sometimes with some of the private stuff. So merit-based scholarships, typically they will defer, or they can be reallocated the following year. So that is typically how that goes. With need-based grants and scholarships and FAFSA, that needs to be re-upped. So it's de rigueur to apply for FAFSA senior year of high school, no matter whether or not you're taking a gap year, to get that baseline, and then you reapply the following year ahead of actually heading out to school. And sometimes something just to keep in mind is that sometimes the financial picture can change over the course of that year. And if it doesn't, typically, unless there's some real upheaval, the amounts tend to be relatively similar. But sometimes one thing that I always like to mention is that if there's siblings involved, if a sibling either leaves the college environment or enters in the college environment alongside the gap year student, that can change that FAFSA picture to the benefit or detriment of the family. So that's something to keep in mind, if that makes sense. Do you want me to, is that clear, Charlie, or should I?
Yeah, no, I think I do think.
Yeah, you guys all know why.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's just good to keep in mind.
And what about, and like you said, this is case by case. A lot of parents ask us about 529 plans. Quickly on that. Can you apply for 529 plans to your gap year?
Yes, you can. If in certain cases with certain organizations that are accredited by colleges, you can apply that 529 money towards that program. So programs like Outward Bound, Knowles, Carpe Diem, programs that have an affiliation with a credit-bearing institution will often allow those 529 funds to funnel through. So that can really be a huge benefit to families. And also students sometimes, if they are saving money on their gap year, may contribute themselves to the 529 money to avoid any big changes to their financial picture for the following year as well. So that's something that people sometimes do.
So we got this question last time, and I think it's an important one. We spoke a little bit about the ethical implications of putting a deposit down. There's also the other side of this, and I think we're seeing more and more students actually take this path. They're saying, I think that I want to go to college, but I'm not quite sure, and I want to take a gap year to figure out where to even apply. And we actually got a question from Stephanie, who I think this piggybacks off of a little bit, and she asked, how often does a student decide they want to attend a different college or choose a different plan of study during or after their gap year? So, we talk about a lot of big concerns that we have sometimes. A lot of parents have concerns that their student's going to take a gap year and then just not go to school. And it's just like, oh, this is it. I've tasted freedom and I'm going to just be out of here. It's really not true. 9 out of 10 students go back to school after they take a gap year. But I think that there are these questions here, learning about who you are and what you want to do if you're going in before school. Stephanie, I think that a lot of students are going to wind up changing. I think that does depend on the type of program that they're in. For us at Year On, we're portfolio based. So students are exploring what they want to actually study. So we get a lot of students who come in and they're like, I'm going to go into business. And we say, okay, what kind of business? And they're like, marketing. We're like, okay, what kind of marketing? And then they get into marketing for a little while. They're like, this is not what I want to do. But they heard from someone somewhere that marketing was fun and that's what they wanted to do. So I think that it actually happens quite often if they're doing that reflective work. And that's, again, goes back to why we say that this should be a year on, not a year off. But let's talk a little bit about applying to college during the gap year. Do we recommend this? And, we get this question a lot. Julia, do you want to just kind of go ahead and just talk us through what it's like for a student who decides senior year, I'm not going to apply to college, I'm going to apply during my gap year?
Sure. Well, sometimes for whatever reason that happens, and like you said, Charlie, most students do not get enamored with the real world on their gap year. If anything, the reverse happens. They become even more excited to start their college experience because they've witnessed their friends at college and they want to be a part of that environment too. But they do draw from their gap year experiences to inform what they want out of their college. So that's why this applying on their gap year can be really valuable. What I think is one of the most important and value adds that can happen on a gap year is to do something in the beginning part of your gap year that if you're applying in that fall period, you have something to write about in your personal statement. So typically what we want to see is a student gather all of that stuff that's not going to change, their transcripts from high school, teacher recommendations, that kind of stuff. There's the summer before they're taking their gap time. So that stuff is all kind of stagnated. And then do something in that late summer, early fall period, a structured program, or start a program that they can have something to write about, or basically anything except for being completely disconnected from reality or from modern technology if they need to be attending Skype interviews or something like that, or in-person interviews during the fall. But aside from that, they could be doing something really exciting that they can write about that will give them that little bit of edge. And that's something that I have seen is colleges, they don't advertise it, but they tend to see that separation that happens from the gap year student versus the traditional student. And it does come across in those personal statements.
Yeah, and I think going back, to Sarah, when you originally spoke about this, you were saying how, from the university perspective, why they're getting on board with this. I mean, what Julia just said, I mean, is that a +1 from you? Is there anything to add there?
I would say that anecdotally, obviously our students, just because the requirements of our program have already been accepted to UNC and are coming, but I do work with other gap year students that I meet once they come to Carolina, and there's at least one student that I've met that said, you know what, I was waitlisted from UNC, my dream school. I went, did a gap year, I reapplied, and got in. And so that gap year experience, if you're able to articulate it as a year on, and as, you've been able to learn in these ways, can really push you over, over the edge and get off the wait list and into your university of choice. So yeah, I would just add that little anecdote. But yeah, I think Julia covered it well.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important. I think, in light of this whole admissions scandal that we've all read about over the past week, everybody's talking about how it's oh man, for parents, watching your kid get rejected is the worst thing. And, we see that. We also think that it's important to learn how to deal with rejection. It's not going to be the first time that these young people deal with it in their lives. And I think that there's a way to frame this. Julia, I really like what you said about framing it as almost a gift. And how can we look at this in an optimistic way and say, what can we learn from this situation so you can be better on the other side? And, for us here, we teach a rejection therapy workshop, and it's like one of our highest rated workshops with students. I mean, this is not, this whole process, I think, is extremely daunting. Applying to college, if you do get waitlisted, if you do get rejected, but how can you turn that into a learning experience, then go back to that school and show how you have differentiated yourself, how you've learned that experience, and how you can grow. And that might mean that you get rejected again, but it could not mean that. And I think that that's what's really important to really start to teach students. We said that we were going to be 45 minutes. We're at the 45-minute mark. I do want to thank everybody for coming today. Julia, Sarah, closing thoughts. Thanks for being with us.
Closing thoughts.
I would say, you're definitely, I'm assuming we have mostly parents and guidance counselors because we are in the school day. But, I think you're taking a really great next step by being attending these webinars and really getting all the information that you can, and definitely really encourage you to empower your young, your student to consider a gap year and to really look at all the great options out there. It's much more accessible than people realize it is. So yeah, thank you so much for attending, and feel free to reach out if you have any further questions.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think that, we're all pretty biased in this space because we've seen just the amazing outcomes. I just had a voicemail from a dad on my phone before this webinar, and he was talking about how his daughter is just finishing up a internship in Dublin where she was working with the Special Olympics, and she got this amazing experience, and she's having the time of her life, not only living life in a foreign city, but also getting this amazingly valuable professional experience before she even starts college. So we have to, I think, just again, ask ourselves what kinds of adults we're trying to build and what kinds of experiences can help with that scaffolding of building the next generation of happy and successful people in whatever ways are meaningful for them.
Agreed. Well, thank you too for coming today, and thank you everybody for joining us. We'll send this webinar out afterwards, so if you want to forward it to any parents or students, feel free to do so. And like Sarah, Julia said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll put in our contact information into the email that we send. And if there are students that we can support with the deferral letter tool, feel free to send it out to them. And even if they want to do it multiple times, we can help them. We can help them out with that. But thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch for our April webinars. But until then, everybody be well. See you soon.